Well, good afternoon and welcome to the principal's office. I am Principal Edward Gordon. I am so glad you have tuned in for this weekly broadcast where we will be interviewing educational stakeholders who have made a significant impact for themselves, for others, and with others in education. In the book, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth, written by Dr. John C. Maxwell, he talks about the law of modeling. The law of modeling states it's hard to improve when you have no one but yourself to follow. A good mentor is a worthy example, available, has proven experience, possesses wisdom, provides friendship, provides support, and makes a difference in people's lives. We believe there are many outstanding leaders in this world, and weekly we want to highlight those leaders, leaders that will help us provide models of excellence for others. Today, I have invited a guest on the show that models excellence, Miss Ebony Porter. Good afternoon, Ebony.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me, Principal Ed.
You are welcome. And I would like to start off with a brief introduction of our guest today. Ebony Porter is an engaging educational leader, a dynamic speaker, podcast personality, and an up and coming entrepreneur. She completed both her Bachelor's of Business Administration and Master of Education from Ohio University. As the creator and founder of This Is 30, Ebony guides millennials as they navigate through their 30s. Serving as an engaging and funny host, she motivates and encourages listeners in over 12 countries every week. This Is 30 is a Christian podcast that emphasizes the importance of seeking Christ every step of the way and applying his teachings. Working in education for the last 8 years, Ebony has served in leadership roles for Ohio University, St. Joseph's Preparatory School, and Friends Select School. She is committed to ensuring that youth and young adults successfully navigate education and are equipped to fulfill their calling and pursue their passions. This year, she is launching a treat company in memory of her grandmother, Doris Porter, who was the former owner of Porter's Soul Food Restaurant in Akron, Ohio. Her guiding quote is by Benjamin E. Mays. Every man and woman is born into the world to do something unique and something distinctive, and if he or she does not do it, it will never be done. Ebony truly believes in the dynamic words of Dr. Mays and wants to ensure that everyone pursues their distinct calling. She strives to inspire listeners and youth to leap and go after all that God has for them. Again, please help me welcome to the show, Ebony Porter.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ed.
You are so welcome, Ebony. I'm so excited for this opportunity to have this conversation with you this afternoon. Jimmy Neal Smith, who is the director of the International Storytelling Center, says, "We are all storytellers. We all live in a network of stories. There isn't a stronger connection between people than storytelling." Ebony, I want to hear, what is your story?
Well, that's a great question. Where do I start? So I guess I will keep it brief, right? Because we don't have all day. But my story began in Arizona. So I was born in Arizona. I'm a millennial. So yeah, I let people figure out the math on that. But was born in Arizona. My mother is from the desert. I always tell people I have a desert mama and a Midwest daddy. My dad's from Ohio. So eventually I was reared in Akron, Ohio. So that's a really cool place. And then eventually I went on to college. So I guess I can jump to that. I attended Ohio University, as you noted, and my undergraduate degree was in business. So I knew like, oh, I'm going to go study business and I'm going to, work in Atlanta and do all these great and wonderful things. And the business piece never happened. I started working with a program called the Junior Executive Business Program at Ohio University. I actually was recruited for the program when I was a junior. Well, let me backtrack. I had a guidance counselor when I was in high school. She strongly encouraged me to participate in this summer business executive program for high school juniors. So I go through, do the I'm like really jumping. I was bringing that up because I always want to shout out Mrs. Yvonne Culver. So the summer leading up to my junior year, Mrs. Culver was putting a lot of pressure on me to participate in the summer program. And I was not interested in it, not because it wasn't a good program, but I worked in the summers. And I knew as a minor that I could work 40 hours a week. Like I knew what the labor laws were, right? So you're asking me about my story. I came from a low income home, and as early as 14, as early as I could get a work permit, I worked. So in the summers, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not doing a summer program because I am trying to get these coins, stack up this money. So I have my school supplies and things that I need for the school year. So she kept putting pressure on me. I'm like, okay, all right, Mrs. Culver, I'll apply. I mean, and still, Ed, at this time, I'm like, I'm not going. You know what I mean? And I told her, I was like, yeah, I have to work, but I'll still apply. So I applied, and it cut, like, I don't know. I didn't even think anything of it. I applied like a month or two later, because I worked after school. I worked for a grocery store. So I come in one day, and my manager, his name was Bernie. He comes up to me. He's like really excited. He's like, Ebony, of course you can participate in the junior executive business program. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, your guidance counselor, she sent me a letter and she wanted to know if you could have a week off to go do the program. I was like, dog. She set me up. You know what I mean? Like I could no longer say that I had to go to work, right? So long story short, shout out to educators who see something in youth and push them even when that may in a direction that they may not have been anticipating going in. So I ended up, because of that, I went through the summer business program, attended Ohio University. When I graduated high school, I had 7 scholarships, and went in to do business. I started interning with the junior executive business program. So that was great. But then when I graduated, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to Atlanta. I'm going to go work in business. But I graduated and I couldn't find a job. I was interviewing, being flown all over the country, and nothing was solidifying. Well, then the university called me back and they're like, hey, do you want to come work with the program? It's like, associate. And I was like, okay. So I started doing that. Then I got into recruitment. Then that's what really opened the door for education. So within 10 years of doing the program, I had became the director of the program. So yeah, I guess that's a little bit about me in regards to how I started in education, started at the collegiate level, and then eventually transitioned into K to 12.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing your story. It's about, right now, I know that the audience understands that you are a worker. And you also shared a story about someone believing in you, and also the mentors to be able to help and guide you to where you are today. Can you just share with the audience a little bit about your time in education in the classroom and also teaching?
So my first experience, well, okay, so I have formal education, but I'll tell you about the first true experience as a teacher, and that probably was being a vacation Bible school teacher. So, through my church, and we would get our curriculum for the summer, and you would have to figure out, okay, how am I going to teach this curriculum? How am I going to keep the kids engaged, right? Because sometimes they're just ready for the snack. So I think that was like my first informal form of teaching, but being a vacation Bible school teacher. But I never really imagined that I would go on to teach. Like, I'll be honest, that was like, I went to do business. Originally, I was an accounting major. So I thought I was going to be a CPA, and yeah, that didn't happen. So eventually I switched over to marketing. But in terms of teaching, what experience do I have? So went on to OU, and in grad school, that's when I formally taught. Ohio University has a first year experience course, like a first year seminar course. So in grad school, I taught that for 2 years. And that was really interesting. It really opened my eyes to young adults, to what they need, to how they learn, to how difficult it can be with so many different learning styles and expectations. And then also it's kind of challenging when you teach a class where some young people don't think is important or relevant. It wasn't like it was physics or, marketing 101. So I had that challenge too, but just to keep them engaged, get them utilizing all university resources. So that was my first time teaching from a university standpoint. Then went on to teach different seminar classes at St. Joe's Prep. And that was different too, because then I started working with ninth graders, right? And I remember the first time somebody raised their hand, like, "Can I go to the bathroom?" I'm like, "Can you go to the bathroom?" But because teaching at the collegiate level, like you don't have to rate. You may excuse yourself, but you just get up and you. So and then so sometimes I'm like, "Yeah, you do what you want," but then I'm like, "Oh no, you can't tell a ninth grader." So you kind of have to have those parameters in place. Then eventually went on to teach sixth grade. I taught English and math, or English, science, social studies in sixth grade. That was wild. I'll probably never teach sixth grade again. That's an awkward time for many young people, and I'm not the usher for that journey. And and then most recently, I'm getting ready to start working with eighth grade girls.
Very good, very good. So a couple of things based on your educational journey as a teacher that resonate with me. One is about the foundation in the church, and I'm just thinking about my life and also my career path. I believe that my experiences and opportunities for public speaking began at the church. Mm-hmm. Also, similar in terms of being a church school and Sunday school teacher. So you have opportunity to gain experience there. And some people overlook those opportunities to grow and to develop your skills before you even enter college, to advance your education, as well as your first opportunities for work. But I'm glad that you had those experiences and opportunities to develop your skills in the church and lay that foundation as well. Another thing with your educational career as a teacher, it's taught at the collegiate level, ninth grade, you talk about sixth grade and now eighth grade. What advice will you share with a teacher or aspiring teacher in terms of these transitions, in terms of teaching students at different levels? What has helped you out to make that transition and pivot to be able to be more relatable and relevant for the grade levels that you're teaching at the time?
So really understanding where they are developmentally, I think that's crucial. So I'll be honest, when I stepped into the sixth grade classroom, I didn't really know, I didn't know the life of a sixth grader. At one point I was a sixth grader, but I didn't really know the intimate details. Like my sixth graders were like really into making slime and selling slime, and I thought it was such a interruption. But now that I reflect on it, I'm like, oh, maybe I could have infused concepts of entrepreneurship. Like how do you get your supplies? How much does it cost you? How much are you going to sell it for? Right? When and how do you sell it? How do you market? When is the appropriate time to do it or not? So I think that looking back on it, finding ways to, not that you take away from the learning process or you get deeply distracted, but if they're interested in things that have the foundations, of entrepreneurship or other life skills, then tapping into that. So I definitely think understanding where your students are from a developmental standpoint, understanding their learning styles and what best suits the classroom, and really trying to tap into that, because they don't all learn the same way. Some are, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, so just really having a feel for who you're teaching. And that just takes time to get to know your students, setting your expectations. Also, what I learned in being a former sixth grade teacher is that you have to have command of the classroom. And if I could be transparent, at times I did not have command of the classroom. It was really, like I said, I taught at the collegiate level, so you didn't have to deal with like behavior issues or like deep hormonal issues. I mean, when you're in the sixth grade, like you're hormonal, right? And so it's like, what in the world? And so just kind of getting prepared for that. So and that opportunity to teach sixth grade came by invitation. There was a school in need and they reached out, and I was like, yeah, sure, I could teach sixth grade. I probably should have did a little bit more research though. But we made it through, that's for sure.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm just thinking about my times as a middle school principal, and I do understand. I remember a lot of changes are going on in their bodies, emotions. One day they are nice, and next time they're crying on your shoulder. So you just have to be able to know and understand the middle school child, and definitely be flexible in your delivery and also your relationship building. But also another key point that you mentioned is about the fact that schools have this core curriculum, but what can you add on based on the interests of your students, and really enrich the experience for them? And I'm glad that now you're even thinking about the entrepreneurial skills that you could be teaching even for middle school students, so that they can continue to develop that as they go through high school as well as college and the rest of their life. So thank you very much for bringing those points across to the audience this afternoon. I want to ask you, what gets you excited every day?
That's a good question. I kind of ask myself that a lot about what gets me excited. Um, it, so I guess, well, I'm in this interesting journey of trying to figure out what I want to do next. So some days I'm excited and some days I'm frustrated, but I just think what gets me excited most days from a professional standpoint is flexibility in my career. So the ability to cultivate and lead in new ways. For example, was serving as the interim director for middle school and upper school admissions. And as you know, because of COVID, everything had to go virtual. So we're like, we're going to do virtual visits. I'm like, okay, great. I implemented a number of new policies and strategies and tactics to do virtual visits. And we actually surpassed the amount of in-person visits that we did last fall virtually, right? I mean, now granted, I'm that type of educational leader where I'm like, okay, if we could do it if we were doing it here, it probably could be done here. And my boss is like, oh, Ebony, like, I don't want you to get burnt. I'm like, no, we can do it. And I think part of her was initially was right. It was a lot kind of going in. I was like, oh, wait a minute, because you think, oh, I can meet with like so many students a day virtually, but it was draining because you're like, wait, are you in the right Zoom room? Did you click the right link? But I just love when I have an opportunity to create and develop new things. And that's what happened with our virtual visits. We also at one point our middle school students were in person. So what we did was we would have a virtual visitor call into an iPad, and then the current middle school student would take the iPad and with them throughout the day. And so that was, I mean, we were just doing, and it may seem really, I don't know, small or maybe to some people not innovative, but it was innovative for us. And the visitor, at the end of the day, they loved their visit. They loved that they got a chance to see the classroom, that their ambassador for the day was literally walking the iPad through the hallways and showing them like, oh, this is the art room. This is such and such, And so as much as possible, we made them feel like they were in and a part of the experience. So yeah, I guess professionally, yeah, that opportunity to grow, to develop, I'm also really competitive. So times in which where I can really tap into being competitive kind of, brings joy to my day. Personally, what do I look most forward to throughout the day? Growing in my faith, working out, trying to be a healthier version of myself, reading. I know you're going to ask me about that later. Yeah. So, just exploring and trying to figure out what life is about and how I can positively contribute and make a difference in my community.
Very good. And yes, there's so much that excites you during the course of the day to actually when you wake up, and that's great. And one thing that you mentioned is about being a creator. Someone's creative, and I would say that is a huge asset in schools, in the business sector. To have an employee, someone is working with you that understands the imagination and being creative is really key. During this time of COVID, many businesses and sometimes schools did some shutdowns in terms of what they were doing in the past. But the opportunity for you to set up these virtual tours and also have this virtual visits with the iPad, and the students are traveling with them, even though they're not with the students in the building, that's creative. And that's what we all have to think about in this role. We don't know exactly what the rest of this particular year is going to bring, and some additional changes in education or even in other areas of business. But we have to be creative. We have to think outside the box to be able to do that. And those that did that during this time period, like you mentioned, had more increase in terms of virtual tours and visits. So I applaud you for utilizing that skill and asset in terms of being creative to actually do what you're doing for the school. Very good. So you
Thanks.
did mention about reading, and I do want to ask you a question about what was the most recent book you have read, and how is that book impacting your actions today?
So I wish I would have grabbed the books, like they're back there on the bookshelf, so I could show them. But so I have two books that I'm reading simultaneously. Really, I had three. Sometimes I get, a lot of like bigger energy around books, and I'm reading and I fall off. But so the two that I'm reading, one is The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. So I am like a personal finance consumer, right? So all things personal finance, about being the best that I can be financially, I love. So for those who don't know, Dave Ramsey is, a financial guru, and he's all about helping people get out of debt, stay out of debt, and live a debt-free life. So I embarked on that journey, or started to go in that direction in 20, I think 16 or 15. And that was just really cool. I mean, I remember meeting a mentor. Once again, I know you always talk about the power of mentors, right? So I met a mentor, and she was telling about Dave. And at this time, I mean, I had credit card debt, car debt, whole bunch of student loan debt. I'm just like swiping and living my best life. And so she's telling me about Dave Ramsey, about how you should have a budget every month and how you should be paying cash for things. And I'm like, this woman has a PhD in like physical therapy with an emphasis on neuroscience. Like, of course you got money to do that. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of, I was dismissing her because of where she was at. And I think we need to look at the journey to where the person got, how they got there. Right. And so I was like, okay, she was like, you need to get the book, you need to get the, Total Money Makeover. And I'm still just like, like, because when you are living your life one way and it may not be working, but you don't think that like you can achieve what somebody else is doing, you dismiss them, if I can be honest. And then this is the thing that hooked me in. She was sharing that when her sister had passed away, because her sister, they're both like really committed to personal finance. She was like, my sister passed, she had $500,000 in cash and assets. And I said, oh, wait a minute. Like, they're not just talking this talk. They are really living this. They're living it out. And my mentor also told me, for my PhD, I paid cash for all of it with the exception of $8,000. I said, oh, wait a minute. Who pays cash for a PhD, right? So I was like, okay, and then she had like, sorry, this is a long tangent because I wanted to put this plug in here for the educators that are listening about financial peace. Okay, so Dave Ramsey has a class called Financial Peace University. But let me get back to the book question. So long story short, she encouraged me to read the book, and I read it, and that propelled my journey to start to get out of debt. So currently, I have no credit card debt, no car debt anymore, working vigorously on the student loan debt. So that was 2016, right? So recently I'm in a book club, and somebody brought up, hey, we want to read the Total Money Makeover. And I was like, okay, great. So I'm reading it for a second time, with other people in the book club. And I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, sorry, that's a plug for the Total Money Makeover. Check out the book, y'all. It can be done. You can get out of debt. So, and yeah, feel free to hit me up if you have more questions about that. Second book that I'm reading is called I Did It to Myself, The Confessions of an Overachiever. And it's all about this pastor. I cannot remember his name. He's actually a bishop. Sorry, I can always share the author later. But once again, I did it to myself, Confessions of an Overachiever, who one night he collapsed and his heart stopped. And so eventually he came back to life, but he was talking about how his constant overworking, his constant always trying to do and achieve and be, and never taking time to rest and to pause and to say no, resulted in his poor health. So he was like, a lot of times people want to say like, oh, the devil tried to take me out. And he was like, I looked back and I looked at what my role was in it, and that I was overextending myself repeatedly. And so that's something that I struggle with, and trying to find a way to dial back, but still achieve. So those are the two books right now.
Very good. And again, thank you for sharing the books that you're reading right now. One thing you mentioned about Dave Ramsey and Financial Peace University, and for me, for the last 8 years, at least twice a year, I facilitate that 9-week course. So I do understand it, and the work of it is beneficial, especially for educators. You never think that you can end and retire as a millionaire. Yes, put the plan together. It definitely does work. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and real quick. So, and in terms of educators becoming millionaires, I want to encourage people to read Chris Hogan's book called Everyday Millionaires. So, so sorry about that, but just take the perimeters off, you all, and go for it. So, but sorry, go ahead.
No problem. Very good. Thank you for adding that. And so you talked about mentorship, and I am a person that definitely supports and encourages everyone to have a mentor and a coach in your life. At this point in time, do you have a mentor or coach in your life? And what has been one thing you've learned from your mentor or coach that has impacted your career?
I have several mentors and coaches, to be honest. And one mentor that comes to mind, and some of the life lessons that she has imparted in me, is just about your attitude. Right. And she is so big on your attitude, determining your altitude. Right. And so she's always big on, how do you step into the room, your presence? How are you treating others? How are you communicating? Are you showing up on time or early? Are you doing what you said you were going to do? So those are things, and above all, are you pleasant? Like, there have been times when we have had, because I also worked with this particular mentor, and there have been times when like stuff went down and she would confront or challenge people, but still like never got like unprofessional. You know what I mean? Sometimes you like lose your cool, but still what I've learned from her is like, yes, we can disagree, but like, I don't have to like hate you or not stand to be your coworker. You know what I mean? When granted, there are some exceptions. Sometimes people act extremely inappropriate and do horrid things at work. I'm not talking, you know what I mean? So you have to know what your non-negotiables are. But I will never forget, I had a coworker, and like it was bad, right? And she had did some things, and I'm like, all right, cool, like I'm done, And not that I don't know if I had necessarily like made it up in my mind to be nasty, but because my mentor, that was something she never really encouraged. And I remember, some things went down, and then that night I'm like in prayer, just praying into my day, and the Holy Spirit's like, you need to go to her and make it right. And I was like, she wronged me. What do you mean? She needs to come to me. I was just like, what? And the Holy Spirit was like, no, you need to. Oh man, that was humbling. But what it reminded me though, at my core, is like, I'm at work with you 40 hours a week. I don't want to always feel like uneasy or that I'm ready to like fight you. It doesn't bring any joy. Mm-hmm. So eventually, we had to sit down and hash it out, and it didn't go the smoothest, but we were able to move forward. So biggest thing one of my mentors teaches me is, attitude, also being mindful of how and when you want to progress, and having a progression plan, always thinking about your next steps. And my other mentor, who is debt free, she's always just really reminding me like, yo, be debt free. So if anything ever happens, you can just, if you ever get cut, you can be like, I'm cool. Or if you don't ever want to be bothered, you could pack up and like, I'm good. You know what I mean? Because I got savings and I don't owe nobody nothing. So
yes. Yeah, that's very good. And life happens. And it's good to be able to go through different challenges that you're having in your life with a coach or a mentor to be able to help you out. And sometimes they've gone through similar experiences and they're there to make sure and to help you not to go through what they went through if they're really a true mentor and a coach to really guide you. So I'm glad that you have several mentors, and that has been a theme for the previous guests on the show as well. That they've all have several mentors and for different areas of their life to help them out. So thank you very much for sharing that with the audience. Let's talk about your work in terms of diversity and inclusion. Okay, how did you get started? What was the education that you had to go through to actually be an assistant and now director of diversity and inclusion? I just wanted to hear a bit more about that journey and also your experiences.
So I never, set out to get into the DEI space. It just kind of was a space I was working in. And then the university formally asked me to serve in that capacity. So my first experience with diversity work was rooted in the Junior Executive Business Program. So that was a program designed to recruit diverse youth in hopes to increase diversity within the College of Business at Ohio University. So Ohio University is a predominantly white institution, and the College of Business, great school, one of the best colleges within the university, predominantly white, predominantly male. So the university had created this junior executive business program, partnered with some key companies. And the desire was, hey, go out, recruit, find the talented youth because we know that they exist. And then, and hopefully through the exposure and through scholarship dollars, they will indeed come to the university. And as I mentioned earlier, that was the same program that I worked with. So I had been doing that work for a while, recruiting, going throughout the state. And then we started to get students from out of the state and different parts. So that was really cool. And it was just growing. And I started to share with my supervisor my desire to leave where I was at, not because of the environment. It was a great work environment, but I lived for those who don't know, Athens, Ohio is a beautiful place, but it's in rural Appalachia. So being a person of color and not being able to get my hair done because there were no salons for Black and brown people. There wasn't a Target, like just some of the things that as a minority, sometimes, you just want, you know what I mean? Like no soul food places, like granted, there were, I'm not trying to knock it. It just, after 10 years, I was like, man, I want to be in a city. Like I want to be with some brown and Black people. I don't even go to Target, but it would be nice to have one to go to, you know what I mean? So as I was articulating that, and in an attempt to keep me, they're like, oh, well, why don't you become our first assistant director of diversity and inclusion, and you can grow it out and we can start working on enrollment for female students or, women, and working with the grad program. So I was like, okay, so that's kind of how my journey began, just doing the work. And then it expanded and kind of exploded. What did I do from a certification standpoint? I went through 2 different institutes. I went through, it's a program called SIDE, and that is the Summer Institute for Diversity Education. And so went through that program. That was intense. And then I got a certification through that. And then also SIDE had a shorter and intensive version, and it was called like an executive version. So I went through both of those certifications. I've also went through a training through the, I think it's called the Cultural Competency Institute. So, just doing various trainings and certifications. Also, this isn't necessarily like a DEI certification, but it helps me in the role. When I served as an academic advisor, I completed certification to become a certified appreciative advisor, And so that certification is a 5-year certification that really helped me to look at people with more of a holistic approach and how I can serve them and hold them accountable as an educator.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing with the audience your journey to actually get in that role and also some experiences and how that particular program was helping to increase the diversity over there at Ohio University. And I just have a question based on your experiences. What were some of the the skills and mindset challenges that you were seeing as you're helping these students come to this university setting? And also, what advice would you share with counselors at schools and also teachers to help these students prepare for these type of environments in this process?
So, I mean, I have different answers for different people. So a lot of times students in public arenas aren't always getting the support and the resources that they need. Um, so really, if because what happens is in public schools is that you have the ratio for students to counselors is very lopsided. You know, a counselor has so many students to cultivate a relationship with. Like, you know, when I was working at the Quaker school, there are only 200 students in the high school. You know, it's 50 students per grade. So that's very doable for the counselor. So if you find that if you are an educator in a bigger public space and you have tons of students, trying to create online portals and websites and ways that or videos where the information always lives, and in addition to meeting one-on-one, but trying to encourage students to utilize maybe some of the content that you have created. I think that that's needed. Also, in those bigger spaces, really trying to get students to start early. So as early as like 10th grade, or maybe even ninth. First, you know, maybe identifying some free summer programs or summer programs that offer scholarships, right? Because at universities, because that gives you a feel for that institution and a feel for if you want to be there. So I would encourage that as early as ninth and 10th grade. And then also, you know, as early as 10th grade, 10th or 11th, well, really 10th, starting to think about not maybe what I want to major in per se. That's great to think about, but also where do I want to go? And then also encouraging them to really figure out the cost behind school, right? I think that's crucial. So starting early, and then also a lot of times we knock. I think as a society we knock starting off in community college, and we had like in Ohio we had a lot of great 2+2 programs. So meaning that you did 2 years at your community college, and then were able to seamlessly transfer over to whatever your college of choice was in the state. And why do you do that? A lot of times you do it because of cause. You know, so many students want this. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And so I don't want, as an educator, I don't want to see young people get into tons of debt for a degree, because a lot of times the degree isn't always yielding, you know, what the investment was. So yeah, hopefully I'm answering the question, right? So trying to create online resources for students, and then also for parents, if you find that your student is in a bigger public space, trying to get them connected to resources and organizations that can help them prepare for life after college. Like I went through a TRIO program. I went through the Educational Talent Search. That's a federal program. And so they worked with us on how to prepare for college and, you know, what to do. And one thing that Dave Ramsey always says is like, don't pay to cross state lines. Like don't, unless you're getting a scholarship to go out of state, why? Mm-hmm. You know, we want to do things for a name and you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yes, you have shared a lot of information and golden nuggets for students that are in high school and looking for colleges, about scholarships, about making some decisions about community colleges before going to a four-year university, staying within the state instead of going across the lines, and the different price and rate for tuition. All of it is good information, and I appreciate you sharing that with the audience. Let's talk a little bit more about, I saw in your bio, this treat company that you have aspired to launch in this year. So tell us, the audience, a little bit more about the treat company that you're planning to start.
So this really, when I think back, I started making treats in middle school, right? And I was just like my kids who were distracted with slime. I was like selling treats in the hallway at school. And eventually my teachers told me I couldn't do that anymore. But nobody ever, I think that's the thing. You know, we have to cultivate our youth when they're doing things that are productive, right? So I was like making Rice Krispie treats and cookies and selling them. And then eventually they told me like, you can't be selling. I don't, you know what I mean? I guess technically I didn't have a food permit and stuff like that, but nobody was like, oh, well, why don't you look into figuring out how you can get a food permit as a young person, or ways that you could have an at-home bakery as a young person, right? So listen, educators, when we see those things in our young people, you know, trying to find a way to cultivate, and I get it. You're trying to manage classroom, curriculum, all of that, but that's just another plug for that. But yeah, so how did it start? It basically started in middle school. Was making treats and stuff and got shut down. But then, you know, I've always loved to cook. So I remember being 10 and making my first meal for my family. I did breakfast and it was horrible. But that really propelled me to try again and keep at it. So yeah, growing up, I just have always loved to cook. My grandmother was a great cook. She made desserts. My grandfather had a restaurant, a soul food restaurant that predates me. By the time I came into their world, the restaurant had closed. But yeah, so just in about the last year or two, you know, people are always like, because I've been in this weird space, like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what's next. And this is the question I get asked all the time, Ed, and it like frustrates me. And I get really annoyed, probably because I can't answer it at times. But they're like, what's your why? What do you want to do? And I'm just like, I don't know what my why. Like, you know, and everybody's like, you gotta get your why, because that's that thing is gonna keep you going. It just hasn't happened for me yet, right? But in the last year and a half or two, I have really got back into cooking and baking and making things from scratch. And I was like, this is like really, I was like, wait, I enjoy this. You know, you ever had like that light bulb go off? Like, oh, this could be something, you know? And I had started doing just cakes for friends here and there, you know, for like little events, not even charging for it, you know what I mean? Like just making up bundt cakes, decorating them, doing little fun things with them. And just people were like, oh, this cake was really, really good. And I was like, oh, okay, you know. I remember I made a dessert and I thought, like, from an aesthetic point of view, I did not like how it looked. But I made this dessert. This was, I think, December before COVID hit. And went to when I was the person responsible for desserts, and it didn't come out how I wanted it to look. I was like, I'm about to throw this in the trash, but I was like, you don't have time to read. So I was like, okay, I just packaged it up, and I literally got. And most time when I make a dessert, I come in and I'm all announcing it and parading it around, you know. But this time I came in and I put the dessert in on the table. I ain't even tell nobody. I was like, it had nothing to do with me. And people started eating the dessert, right? And somebody was like, who made this? This is great. And I was like, oh, it is. So yeah, just because it didn't look how I wanted to look, the taste was still there. And when we all had packed up, I didn't have any, my container was empty. So that wasn't anybody being nice, because I had made stuff before for friends, and the contain, you know, you live and you learn. But going back to what you asked me, I was just sharing kind of the progression. So that light bulb went off about the possibility of doing baking on a more serious level. And that's where I'm at now. So, you know, the two of us, we met through going through the BEI, the Black Entrepreneur Institute. So I'm researching. I set up an online portal with my state to start my LLC. Also printed out the application to get approval for an at-home bakery. The application is 15 pages. I was like, oh my goodness, that freaked me out. But I was like, wait a minute, you've written more than 15 pages. So I'm just going through the process now of trying to get the approval. So you have to pay, you submit your application. I may have to submit food samples to a lab. And then once all of that goes through and I get approved, then they have to come out and do a home inspection or a kitchen inspection. So once all of that happens, I'll be approved and I could, sell from my home. I could do farmers markets, restaurants. I really want to connect. My other vision was in my neighborhood, we have a number of coffee shops and coffee shops that do not have the capacity to do baked goods in house because they don't have the kitchen or the space. So they outsource. So I would really love to, sell my baked goods to individuals and to some of the coffee shops.
That sounds wonderful. And on the screen, I've been showing and sharing your Facebook. They can find you there, Facebook, Ebony Porter, and also on Instagram as well, at ebony.l.porter. So please follow Ebony Porter and be able to purchase some of her treats that she is producing. So I want to transition for the last few minutes that we have in this interview to talk about your podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Sis, this is 30. So
Yeah.
share with the audience about the podcast, please.
So the podcast was birthed into out of entering my 30s, and some days like, what in the world is going on? Like you thought your career was going in this direction, or you thought your life was going to be like this, and it's maybe not going in the direction that you want. So it's just, or maybe it is, but it's a podcast dedicated to individuals that are preparing for their 30s or currently maneuvering their 30s. So we talk about all areas of life, faith, fitness, wellness, career, finances, relationships. Yeah, so we just kind of break it down. It's been doing really, really well. Launched in May of 2020. We currently are in 12 countries, meaning that we have listeners from 12 different countries. So that's been amazing. And I recently did an episode for my alma mater to bring attention to one of my mentors who's retiring. And we did that. And we also were part of a campaign to help raise money for a scholarship in her name. So, through the short couple of months that the podcast has been up, we have been reaching a number of people and making a difference, and also have had, had an opportunity to do a little philanthropy. So the podcast is on all platforms. Sis, this is 30. It's also rooted in the scripture Matthew 6:33, which is seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. So many times, as believers, we can get caught up in seeking so many other things. And Christ is like, no, if you seek me, if you stay with me, because this is where it's at, in all honesty, right? That he will reveal and provide for you and give you the desires of your heart. So that's basically what it is. It's pretty cool. It's just me, and my cousin he's my executive producer, and that's that.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing. Again, it's the podcast Sis, This is 30, and it can be listened to on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and also Anchor. And below, we have the different links that you'll be able to follow Ebony Porter in this podcast. Ebony, can you just please share with the audience just one final thought that you would like to share with anyone in education, a student, a teacher, an administrator? Just some final words from you of advice and encouragement.
So I would go back to my quote that you shared earlier from Dr. Benjamin E. Mays. And Dr. Mays is credited with laying the intellectual framework for the civil rights movement. And in that quote, he states that, each man and woman is born into this world to do something unique and something distinctive. And if he or she does not do it, it will never get done. So there are things that if you're, an educator, if you're a youth, that you are called to do, that is only connected to you. And it is your unique and distinct assignment. And if you don't do it, it's going to go to the grave with you. So I'm just encouraging people in 2021 to be encouraged, to be motivated, even if things kind of fell apart in 2020. Okay, it's a new year. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and go after those dreams and those visions that God has placed in your heart, right? Because the world needs them. You know what I mean? Like, I think about just how much Amazon has blown up over the, just the last couple of years. And even during the pandemic, I sometimes when I'm out and about, I walk around in my neighborhood and I see an Amazon truck every 5 minutes, right? And they're getting ready to build an Amazon grocery store in my neighborhood. I didn't even know Amazon, and so why am I saying that? Because he had an idea. Like when you look at the first videos of like Jeff Bezos back in the day, he's like with this huge black computer and this little phone, and you're like, people probably were like laughing at him, like, yeah, who's gonna? But look at him now, you know what I mean? Or I also think about Grubhub and DoorDash. Whoever would have thought, if you would have told me 10 years ago you could have a Big Mac delivered to you, I'm like, what? Who gets a Big Mac? But it's happening. People, you know what I mean? So don't put limits on yourself. Go for it. Try. Do pitch competitions to get funding. Look for grants. Connect with other people and cultivate it. Don't sit on it in 2021. Go after all that God has for you. Leap. Don't be afraid. And yeah, it's gonna be a great year. It may be bumpy, but like nothing gets done just sitting around. That's for sure. And dreaming. I think sometimes I struggle with like constantly pondering things, but we just gotta do. So take that first step.
Thank you very much. And again, I just want to thank you for being on the show today. And thank you for modeling excellence for your school community and the work that you're doing. And for everyone watching, thank you for tuning in to the principal's office. And join us next week for another episode with an amazing educator that has done things significantly for themselves, for others, and with others. Everyone, have a great week and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.